In this very in-depth forecast, the possibility of widespread severe thunderstorms is expected to set up across the Central Plains this afternoon. Severe storms are expected to harbor the potential of a couple of tornadoes, widespread damaging wind gusts, and the possibility of massive hailstones. Everything you need to know on Project Gladiator. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for May 1st of 2024. For today, we have an enhanced risk for western Oklahoma into western Texas here, with a slight risk that extends all the way up into southern Nebraska and all the way into eastern Texas. Risks for today do include a 5% tornado risk, where we could see the potential of a couple tornadoes anywhere from southern Kansas, western Oklahoma into western Texas, as well as a 30% damaging wind risk, where we could see the potential of some widespread damaging wind gusts for western into central Texas, and the possibility for some scattered damaging wind gusts up to southern Nebraska. And then for our hail risk, we do have a 30% for western Oklahoma into northwestern, northern central Texas there, with the possibility of some massive hailstones across this region. For tomorrow, we do have a marginal risk that extends all the way from southern Minnesota and southwestern Wisconsin, including northwestern Illinois, Iowa, northern into northwestern Missouri, southeastern Nebraska, eastern Kansas, central Oklahoma into north central Texas. Risks for tomorrow do include a 2% tornado risk for the northern half of that risk, anywhere from Kansas into Wisconsin, and a 5% damaging wind risk that extends across the entire marginal risk area, as well as a 5% large hail risk. And then for our day 3 outlook, we do have the possibility of severe thunderstorms for the Central Plains, for Nebraska, eastern Colorado, Kansas into northern Oklahoma. And then for day 4, day 8 outlook, we do have a day 6 15% for the Central Plains, where we could be watching for the potential of some significant severe thunderstorms for the Central Plains, for north central Texas, central Oklahoma, central into eastern Kansas, as well as central into southeastern Nebraska. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast, for today we do have a moderate risk for southeastern Texas here, where we could see the potential of some widespread and possibly significant flash flooding, as well as a slight risk that is detached from our other slight risk in the south there that does extend into Oklahoma. We do have a slight risk for western Iowa into central and southeastern Nebraska into northern Kansas there, where we could see the potential of some scattered flash flooding for both slight risk regions. For tomorrow, we do have a pretty large slight risk that extends across Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, eastern Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri, and Illinois, where we could see the potential of some scattered flash flooding. And then for day 3 outlook, we do have multiple marginal threat areas where we could see the potential of some isolated flash flooding for the Central Plains, for the southern Central Plains into the Mississippi River Valley, and even into some of the Ohio River Valley, such as Kentucky and Tennessee, for northern Alabama, Mississippi, southern Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas, as well as a marginal threat for the western coastline, for western Oregon into northwestern California, and portions of small extreme southwestern Washington there. Taking a look at our winter weather outlooks for today, we could see the potential of some heavy snowfall for more elevated portions of the Rockies. Same with our day 2 outlook, and same with our day 3 outlook. Taking a look at our weather model, starting off with our 500 millibars, as well as our surface observations and how those will work in conjunction to indicate the risk for severe thunderstorms for today. Starting off with our upper air pattern, we are expected to see a pretty powerful upper level jet here across the northern Central Plains there into the Midwest, which did lead to severe thunderstorms yesterday, and we are expected to see a trough that is going to push into the Central Plains. The northern Central Plains may be extending down into the Central Plains. However, flow will be very, very limited the further south you go. Flow will likely be extremely limited from Kansas into Oklahoma and Texas. We will have our subtropical jet that is expected to definitely aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms, and will definitely be a major aiding factor with a lack of strong flow aloft at our 500 millibars. However, as far as our surface observations go, we do have a triple point that is set up across the Texas Panhandle and the Oklahoma Panhandle. We are expected to see a dry line that is expected to push in across western Texas. That is going to trigger our risk for severe thunderstorms with that subtropical jet aloft that is going to support it. And then we also do have a stationary front that is likely going to turn into a warm front and slowly push off to the north over the next couple of hours. But we are also expected to see a dry line that is going to not only extend across western Texas, but is also going to push all the way up into Kansas, and we are expected to see a pretty decent notch right up in our dry line, just to the south of our warm front, right along our low pressure system, and that will definitely trigger our risk for severe thunderstorms across the central plains. We could see the potential of severe thunderstorms and more scattered severe thunderstorms further off to the north, where we do have a stronger flow aloft, but the majority of our moisture will definitely be much more limited the further off to the north you go, especially with our warm front that's going to be all the way down into central Kansas. But we could definitely see the potential of some scattered to isolated severe thunderstorms fire off all the way up into Nebraska. Taking a look at our low-level jet and how that will affect our risk for tornadoes across this region and our directional shear, with a lack of strong flow aloft further down to the south across Texas, we are definitely going to see a much lower, much weaker and much lower end low-level jet across Texas, even into Kansas, because of the lack of strong flow aloft. Our subtropical jet again will definitely be a major aid, but we are expected to see at least a more weaker low-level jet that is expected to develop later on this afternoon, and that will definitely support quite a lot of directional shear and support the potential for tornadoes. It is definitely moderately strong. It isn't too terribly strong, with 850 millibar flow that could reach anywhere from 40 to 30 miles per hour across this region. Again, that will definitely be pretty supportive of the potential of tornadoes across this region, even amongst our weaker end flow at our 500 millibars. But with our low level jet out of the southwest and our flow at 500 millibars with our subtropical jet out of the west southwest, a little bit more on the western side, you can already kind of see how our hodographs are going to look. You can definitely see how we will have the curvature in the low levels of our hodograph, and we'll definitely see some directional shear to support the potential of tornadoes across this region, but we definitely won't have a too terribly high risk for tornadoes across this region. Further off to the north, we will see a low-level jet that could potentially get a little bit stronger, because we do have a little bit stronger flow aloft further off to the north, and will be somewhat affected by our trough across this region. So we could see a stronger low-level jet and potentially more directional shear up to the north, with a low-level jet that could potentially get upwards of 50 to 60 miles per hour across western Oklahoma in a smaller region. But with our trough across this region, kind of looking like this at 500 millibars, with our low-level jet kind of looking like this at our 850 millibars, you can kind of see how our hodographs may look a little bit something more like this. Definitely not as much curvature in the low levels of the hodograph. It's definitely a little bit more straighter, so we could see some lower end directional shear further off to the north, but we will definitely have a much stronger low-level jet, which could lead to some more stronger low-level shear across this region. And especially with that stationary front at the surface, we should see winds that are going to be pushing out of the west or out of the east, and then on the southern end of that stationary front or warm front, we will see winds out of the south with our warm air advection, and that will definitely lead to a lot of surface vorticity along that warm front, which will definitely lead to increased tornado risk along that warm front, with any storms that can fire along that warm front. But along the dry line further down to the south, anywhere across this region, we'll definitely see a much more limited low-level jet and much more limited directional shear. Taking a look at 200 millibars and how that will affect our risk for severe thunderstorms, as well as our potential for hail across this region, we are expected to see a pretty strong 200 millibar jet off to the north here, with 200 millibar flow that could potentially reach upwards of 100 to 90 knots across this region. Further down to the south, we will have that subtropical jet pushing out of Mexico in the Pacific Ocean here. And that will definitely support quite a lot of decent speed shear across this region with a 200 millibar jet that could reach upwards of 80 knots across this region. And that will definitely be supportive of the potential for hail. Further off to the north, where we do have that 30% tornado risk, or sorry, not 30% tornado risk, our 30% hail risk, we may be able to see a little bit greater risk for hail across this region, as we will have a little bit more overlap with our strong 200 millibar jet. But further off to the north, we will definitely have more limited instability with more limited moisture, with moisture having a hard time trying to extend that far north. But where we could see our strong 200 millibar jet and a lot of speed shear overlap with our strong moisture, we could definitely see the potential for some massive hailstones across western Oklahoma and the Texas Panhandle. As far as our spreading of our wind vectors and how that may affect our risk for severe thunderstorms overall, we aren't really expected to see too terribly noticeable 200 millibar spread of our wind vectors further off to the north in conjunction with our 200 millibar jet in our trough across the northern central plains. You can definitely see that there is going to be some subtle spreading of our wind vectors, but further off to the north as we further off to the south as we move into the more Kansas region, we won't really have a too terribly noticeable spreading of our wind vectors. In fact, it does look like we may have a little bit more confluence than we will have spreading of our wind vectors. And then further off to the south, we definitely have some pretty noticeable spreading of our wind vectors and pretty noticeable defluence here with winds on the northern side of our subtropical jet moving to the northeast, and then further off to the south in southern Texas, kind of off to the east, or maybe even a little bit to the southeast as well. Definitely some noticeable spreading of our wind vectors, and that will definitely aid in our overall risk for severe thunderstorms across Texas. Taking a look at our storm relative felicity and how that may affect our directional shear and our risk for tornadoes across this region. Across the 5% tornado risk, we are expected to see a moderately strong low-level jet, but it's definitely going to be a little bit more on the lower end side of things due to the fact that we don't really have a strong trough, but we do have some weak upper level flow at our 500 millibars and a decently strong low-level jet. We will definitely see much more lower and much more limited storm relative felicity values across this region, with storm relative felicity values upwards of 100 to potentially 200, where we could see the potential of a little bit more of a stronger low-level jet across western Oklahoma. Further off to the north, as we move into Kansas, we will definitely have a much stronger directional shear due to the fact that we will have a lot of vorticity along that warm front, but we will also have that low-level jet and our 500 millibar flow that will definitely be much more stronger further off to the north into Nebraska, but we will definitely have much more limited instability due to how far north our warm front is expected to be. It is definitely not going to be able to get all the way up north into the area of some strong storm relative felicity values. If it could, we could definitely see a much higher risk for tornadoes, but our instability will definitely be much more limited further off to the north. But backing our storms, we will definitely have some pretty spotty regions where we do have some strong storm relative felicity values, but that won't really be able to really affect our storms, and it may be a little bit more contamination from our storms that just passed through this region on our models. But ahead of our storms, we will definitely see some much more limited storm relative felicity values that are more in line with the 5% tornado risk. We could still see the potential for a couple tornadoes across this region, but we shouldn't really see anything too crazy as far as the tornado risk. Taking a look at our bulk shear and how that will affect our risk for hail across this region, we are expected to see some pretty strong bulk shear backing our storms, even in a region where we don't really have too strong 500 millibar flow aloft, but we definitely have some pretty decently strong 200 millibar flow aloft with that subtropical jet, with bulk shear values upwards of 40 to 50 knots backing our storms, and we will definitely have noticeably higher bulk shear values as we move into the Texas Panhandle and western Oklahoma in the Oklahoma Panhandle, with that 30% risk for hail across this region, with bulk shear values that could potentially reach 50 to 60 knots across this region, backing our storms, which will definitely be supportive of the potential of some massive hailstones across this region. We could still see the potential of some hail further off to the north, where we do have our strong 500 millibar trough with bulk shear values that could potentially reach upwards of 60 to potentially 70 knots in some regions, which will definitely be supportive of the potential for hail across this region, amongst some more limited instability. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity, so we can go over some general radar analysis as well as some timing, so we can get an idea of how our storm mode may affect our severe risk, as well as our timing for our storms. Our storms are expected to begin developing across the dry line across western Texas, far western Texas, in the region where we don't really have a whole lot of radar coverage, likely beginning anywhere from 4 to 5 p.m. across western Texas, and moving into the Midland region with widespread upscale growth that is going to continue along the dry line across western Texas into western Oklahoma, around 6 to 7 p.m., moving into the Midland area around 6 to 7 p.m., and we are expected to begin to see development across the Kansas region, likely beginning anywhere from 6 to 7 p.m., and we will continue to see upscale growth from there, moving into central Kansas anywhere from 9 to 10 p.m., and into the Abilene area, likely around 10 to 11 p.m. to potentially midnight, and then moving into the Dallas-Fort Worth area as it rapidly organizes into a mess to potentially a linear mode of storms, around midnight to 1 a.m. across this region, and moving into the Wichita region around midnight to 1 a.m. And then that will move into places such as Waco and Killen, likely around 2 to 3 a.m., and Topeka in eastern Kansas around 2 to 3 a.m. As far as radar analysis goes, we could see the potential of some scattered severe thunderstorms across southern and eastern Texas that are a little bit more messy and more isolated, and that will definitely support the potential for likely some damaging wind gusts and potentially some large hail. However, as far as along the dry line goes, where we could see the potential for tornadoes, we will likely see the potential for some more discrete mode. Our geometry of our trough definitely really supports more of a discrete mode. However, storms are expected to be very widespread along this dry line, which will likely turn this into potentially more of a messy to more linear mode, as the majority of our downdrafts will merge with the rest of the downdrafts across this line. We could definitely see the potential for more of a discrete mode that may last for a couple of hours, mainly from like 2 to 3 hours after storms develop, but it will rapidly organize into potentially more of a linear to more messy mode, with our updrafts that are going to transition to the east of our downdrafts into more of a linear mode there. Further off to the north, we could definitely see much more of an isolated mode, as a lot of models have been trending towards more of an isolated mode across the Kansas region, which will definitely be very supportive of the potential for tornadoes across this region. Any storms that may develop further off to the north along the warm front region, even past the warm front region, could definitely be very, very photogenic, as further off to the north we will have less and less moisture, which will likely lead to some more convective inhibition across this region, and some very beautiful storms being possible, especially with the fact that this is going to be a little bit more of a discrete mode, and our discrete mode could definitely last much longer than further down to the south, but it will likely get much more messier whenever more convective inhibition is increased as the sun sets. Taking a look at our dew points and how that will affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see some pretty high dew points across this region to the east of the dry line, with dew points that could potentially reach upwards of the low to mid 60s. Depending on our cloud cover, which we will look at, we may have to watch for the potential of overmixing across this region, because that will lead to overall less instability with less moisture at the surface if the atmosphere begins to overmix. We will look at our cloud cover and the possibility of overmixing, but we will definitely have to watch that if we have a lack of cloud cover. And I am noticing how we do have less moisture, less dew points closer to the dry line than further off into regions such as central and eastern Texas. So I do think that overmixing may potentially be a problem. Further off to the north, where our dry line where our warm front is expected to extend to, we will see dew points that could potentially reach the mid to low 60s, and maybe even the low 70s into portions of western Oklahoma there. Even regardless, across this warm sector, we will definitely have some really decent instability, as we will definitely have some really decent moisture across this region, and we will definitely have to watch for the potential of overmixing, as it does seem like we will have much more spotty dew points. And where we have some pretty strong moisture, if it isn't really organized like this and we have small pockets of less moisture, that is typically a sign of overmixing, due to the fact that we have less moisture at the surface. So we will definitely have to watch for the potential of overmixing across this region, as that may be much more limiting to a severe thunderstorm risk across this region. Taking a look at our temperatures and how that will affect our instability across this region, we are definitely expected to see some really warm temperatures, with temperatures that could potentially get upwards of the low 90s across western Texas, and even the mid and upper 80s just to the east of the dry line. And up into the warm front, we could see temperatures that could reach the low 90s, but if not, we could still see temperatures that may reach the upper 80s to the mid 80s, and even into the upper 70s across this region, which will definitely lead to quite a lot of instability across this region. However, with how warm it is, depending on our cloud cover, we will definitely have to watch for the potential of overmixing. I do have one main uncertainty, though, is the fact that the majority of our storms do look like they are probably going to take more of a nocturnal route, with temperatures that are going to be much lower as they progress through the enhanced risk region. However, with temperatures, or with the time being around 9 to 10 p.m., that is typically when the sun is still up for the spring season. It's not like it's winter where the sun sets at 6 p.m. anymore, so we could very well still see our storms track through more of a daytime mode, but as they move into more of the slight risk region on the eastern side of the enhanced risk, into more central Oklahoma, more central Kansas, more central Texas, that will definitely take much more of a nocturnal route, and will lead to overall less of a risk for severe thunderstorms, as we will have less surface heating and less overall surface instability and more convective inhibition. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that will affect our instability across this region, we are expected to have some really high lapse rates across western Texas, even into western Oklahoma, with lapse rates that could very well reach the low 9s, but mainly lingering around the upper 7s to the upper 8s. And we could see lapse rates that could reach the low to mid 7s and 8s across western Oklahoma, as well as we move into the Kansas region. We will also definitely see some pretty decent lapse rates as well, further off to the north, with lapse rates that could potentially reach upwards of the mid 8s, and potentially reaching the upper 8s in some regions, maybe even approaching the 9s. That will definitely be a massive aid for our instability across this region, and will definitely be very supportive of a hail risk as well, with our lapse rates that will expand our layer for hail development. And with a strong updraft, we could definitely see our rain particles be suspended in that layer for hail development much longer, due to that expanded hail development layer aloft. Taking a look at our cloud cover and how that will affect our lapse rates, as well as our instability, and how that may need to be watched for overmixing across this region. We do have some relatively thick cloud cover across the western Oklahoma and northwestern Texas region, but we don't really have a whole lot of cloud cover across western Texas. In fact, our cloud cover has actually become much more prominent over the last couple of hours. We do have some spotty cloud cover. It isn't too terribly thick, and sun can still reach the surface. We will definitely have quite a lot of surface heating, and that cumulus field is definitely a really big indicator of the fact that we do have quite a lot of instability across this region, amongst a cap as well, so that that cloud cover will definitely likely prevent too much of a risk of over mixing across this region, that more subtle cloud cover. But if we did have perfectly clear skies across this region, I definitely would think that we would have to watch a little bit more for over mixing, as that would definitely become much more of a prominent risk. However, we still may have to watch for the potential of over mixing, especially with how hot it is expected to get across this region. Those temperatures in the low 90s will definitely lead to quite a lot of instability, and definitely may need to watch for the potential of some over mixing. But regardless, this light cumulus field is a really big indicator of where our instability is and how much instability we have. But we may have to watch for some subtle over mixing. But with that more subtle cloud cover, that will likely prevent too much overmixing. Further off to the north, we definitely have a much more thicker cloud cover across the Kansas region, which will likely be overall more of a limiting factor than it really will be more of a supporting factor, as cloud cover will likely lead to more limited surface heating. We do have some spotty cloud cover further down to the south in southern Kansas there, but across the majority of the region, we do have some much more thicker cloud cover, which will likely lead to some much more thicker instability, despite having some stronger lapse rates across this region. Taking a look at our 700 millibar temperature and our convective inhibition, how that will affect our instability and our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, we are expected to see constant warm air advection out of the south, very, very warm air advection as well, which will likely lead to an elevated mixed layer in place across the central plains, even up into Kansas there. And you can see our warm front push to the north, and how our warmer advection will definitely be really, really warm that far north. We will definitely have a lot of very, very warmer advection out of the south, which will likely lead to an elevated mixed layer across this region, which will need to be overcome to support the risk for severe thunderstorms if storms want to fire across this region. However, we do have some convective inhibition across this region that is slowly dying off and slowly eroding, so that elevated mixed layer and that cap is slowly eroding across the warm sector. So with that cap in place in that elevated mixed layer, that will likely lead to a lot of instability building across this region, and will likely lead to a lot more explosive updrafts as well. We will see our convective inhibition likely begin increasing around the 10 p.m. Time frame, and further on as storms move into the slight risk region, which will definitely lead to a dying risk for severe thunderstorms as storms move into more central Oklahoma, central Kansas, and central Texas. Taking a look at our most unstable cape and how that will fuel our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. Across the dry line, we are expected to see some really strong cape values, upwards of the mid to upper 2000s and even reaching the low 3000s. And we are expected to see a pool of instability that is going to push into northwestern Texas and western Oklahoma, with cape values that are going to be reaching the mid and upper 3000s, and potentially even reaching the low 4000s across this region. And that will definitely lead to a much more higher localized risk for severe thunderstorms. And as that pushes to the north, where we have a little bit more forcing along our dry line, we could definitely see a much bigger risk for severe thunderstorms in that little pocket of stronger instability there. Much stronger instability nonetheless. That is some really high cape values. Even regardless, across the entire warm sector along the dry line, we have some really high cape values that will definitely be sufficient to fuel the risk for severe thunderstorms, including the potential of tornadoes, the potential for damaging wind gusts, and the potential for some massive hailstones. Further off to the north, where we do have a little bit higher cloud cover and some pretty decent lapse rates across this region, we will see cape values that will likely reach the low to mid 2000s just to the south of the warm front, along that dry line notch there, where our warm front and our cold front, our warm front and our dry line come together. Further off to the north of our warm front, we will definitely see much more limited instability, with cape values that could reach the upper triple digits, maybe the low 1000s, further off to the north into northern Kansas, into southern Nebraska, which may be able to support the potential of some warmer advection triggered storms across this region. However, due to the fact that it is going to be to the south of the warm front, any storms that likely fire across this region will definitely be elevated and have a very, very limited risk for tornadoes. In fact, we may even have no tornado risk, depending on how far north our warm front wants to extend further off to the north across Nebraska and Kansas. Taking a look at our surface-based cape, I don't really have a whole lot to say about this other than the fact that the majority of our surface-based cape the majority of our most unstable cape is expected to translate down to our surface-based, and we are expected to see much more limited surface-based cape, but still sufficient surface-based cape later on in the afternoon as we move into Oklahoma, central Oklahoma into central Texas. We'll definitely have much more limited surface-based cape, but still some sufficient surface-based cape nonetheless to fuel surface-based storms, the potential for a lower-end tornado risk in the middle of the night across more central Oklahoma and central Texas. And then further off to the north into the Kansas region, we will have a lot of surface-based cape to the south of our warm front that will translate down from our most unstable. However, we will hardly have any surface-based cape as we move into northern Kansas and southern Nebraska, which will likely lead to much more elevated severe thunderstorms if any severe thunderstorms fire at all across this region. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that will aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. We are expected to see some much more lower 0 to 3 kilometer instability across this region. We could see a small pocket of some pretty moderately strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability develop as storms move out of the enhanced risk region into the slight risk region, which will aid in our overall risk for severe thunderstorms and a dying risk for severe thunderstorms. This pocket of 0 to 3 kilometer instability will likely keep our severe risk ongoing at a pretty decently strong pace. However, this will definitely be on its more dying side of things as storms move into the late afternoon hours, the late evening hours, as surface instability or surface convective inhibition is introduced. Further off into the north, we will definitely have a pretty moderately strong pocket of 0 to 3 kilometer instability along our warm front there, which will likely aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms along the warm frontal zone. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that will indicate our tornado risk across this region, we are expected to see a locally higher risk for tornadoes with some really strong energy helicity index values, upwards of 4 to potentially 5 and maybe even 6 across western Oklahoma into eastern, the northwestern Texas and the eastern Texas panhandle there. We do have locally higher thermodynamics overall with a locally higher low-level jet, locally higher most unstable cape and surface-based cape, with those cape values that are going to be getting upwards of the upper 3,000s across this region, maybe even reaching the 4,000s. With our locally higher low-level jet, I wouldn't be surprised to see the potential for a significant tornado across western Oklahoma and the eastern Texas panhandle. I definitely think that's not out of the question. I definitely think we could see the potential for a significant tornado. I wouldn't be surprised for them to upgrade this to a 10% tornado risk across this region. However, we will have much more limited storm relative helicity values across this region, so I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't upgrade it as well. So they could upgrade it at our 4 p.m. I do think that they probably won't upgrade it at our 4 p.m. update or 4 p.m. EST at our I think 2000Z update from the SPC. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if they did upgrade it, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. Around the rest of the 5% tornado risk region, we will have some much more limited energy helicity index values, especially along the dry line, with energy helicity index values that are probably going to be getting upwards of 3 to potentially 4, but they are going to be kind of spotty and not really too ahead of our storms. But still in line with a 5% tornado risk and still indicating the potential for maybe a couple tornadoes across the dry line. Further off to the north, we do have much more clearer energy helicity index values, with energy helicity index values that could potentially get upwards of 3 to 2 across the dry line notch there just to the south of our warm front, where we could definitely see the potential for maybe a significant tornado, but definitely see the potential for a couple tornadoes across this region. But again, I definitely don't think a significant tornado is out of the question for southern Kansas into western Oklahoma and the eastern Texas panhandle. Taking a look at our 10-meter wind gust and how that will indicate the risk for damaging wind gusts across this region. Starting off with a 30% wind risk across this region, we are expected to see some pretty strong damaging wind gusts and some pretty widespread damaging wind gusts associated with our storms. This model run is actually indicating the potential of damaging wind gusts that may be able to get upwards of the upper 60 miles per hour across this region, which isn't a one-time thing either. We definitely have a couple of spots where we could see damaging wind gusts upwards of 60 miles per hour, maybe even reaching 70 miles per hour. I have noticed that the wind gust models do tend to make our damaging wind gust risk a little bit lower than what is actually possible across this region. So honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see the potential for some significant damaging wind gusts as well, potentially upwards of 70 to maybe even isolated 80 mile per hour damaging wind gusts across this region with one or two of these storms. I definitely think that there may be the potential for some significant damaging wind gusts with this, but either way, we could still see the potential of some pretty strong and widespread damaging wind gusts across this region. Taking a look at our large hail parameter and how that may indicate the potential for large hail across this region, we are still hours ahead from storm development, so we don't have anything indicated from our meso analysis page as far as large hail. We do have a couple of regions here, uppers of 12, and the potential for large hail that extends across northern Texas and southwestern Kansas there. Again, we are still hours away from storm development, so our meso analysis page isn't really going to indicate too much of a risk for large hail just yet. Until our storms actually develop. For our significant hail percentage, we have upwards of 165 for that region of some locally higher instability across northwestern Texas and western Oklahoma. That is some really high significant hail parameter values across this region, upwards of, again, 165. That is really high, very indicative of the potential for significant hail. I definitely think that we could see the potential for some widespread significant hail, especially with that locally higher area of some much higher most unstable Cape values. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong with this forecast or would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather, Weather Watcher, and JaxonWX. The links to those channels will be in the description, and hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.